Setting up is always a pain. Do do do. Okay. So I got that part. How are we sounding? How are we sounding? How are we sounding? How are we sounding? Okay. Sounding all right. Do the socials. How's everybody doing on this Wednesday? I think it's Wednesday. Yeah. Wet my whistle here a little bit. Okay, so there's nobody here yet, but to recap, some mysterious benefactor who escaped the labyrinth was toasting an individual named Haplo. Talking about a labyrinth that was set up by a people called the Sartan, not to be confused with the Spartan. One sec. I gotta go make sure my door is shut so I don't get a kid coming in here randomly. I'll be right back. Yeah, we've got a kid or two here who don't understand boundaries. Is what it is, as they say. So yeah, there was a labyrinth. Some guy escaped it. He's talking to the second person to have escaped it. His name is Haplo. I don't believe we have met Haplo yet. What else? Another gentleman by the name of Hugh the Hand was being hauled away in a wagon to go get beheaded for assassinating the king. The sheriff or general of the knights was angry because his emperor was the best emperor he'd ever had. He broke out in tears while yelling at Hugh, while Hugh told him, "You know why I killed him. It's partly your fault." Appreciate it, man. Thank you so much. And then there was the magician named Magica. I still think that's a stupid name, who I do believe, from what was alluded to, paid Hugh the Hand to assassinate the emperor for whatever reason. There's some shady business going on there. And then, what was it? Oh, I forget who. I think we're getting to that. Yeah, so somebody on Dragonback just appeared to save Hugh the Hand's neck and whisk him away, I do believe. And I think that's where they're going to get into it currently, but I know Magic is going to be pissed. So with that really bad recap, let's get into chapter 3 of Dragonwing. Chapter 3, Keyleth Keep, Dandrick Mid-Realm. A gigantic shape blacker than the Lords of Night appeared above the keep's towers. No one could see clearly in the gloom, but the flapping of huge wings was audible. The gate guards clashed sword against shield, sounding the alarm, causing everyone in the courtyard to turn his attention from the impending execution to the threat above. Knights drew their swords and shouted for their mounts. Raids by Tribus corsairs were commonplace, and one had been expected daily in retaliation for the abduction and subsequent death of the elf lord who had allegedly hired Hugh the Hand. What is it? Bellowed Gareth, endeavoring vainly to see what was going on. Torn between leaving his post at the side of the prisoner and rushing to the gates that were his responsibility. Ignore it! Get on with the execution! Snarled Magica. But Three-Chop Nick demanded an attentive audience, and he had lost this one. Half of the crowd was staring at the gate, the other half was running toward it. Lowering his blade with an air of wounded pride, Nick waited in hurt and dignified silence to see what all the fuss was about. It's a real dragon, fools! One of ours, not an elf ship. It's one of ours! Gareth shouted. You two, keep an eye on the prisoner. The captain raced to the gates to quell the spreading panic. The battle dragon swooped low over the castle. A score of rope cables glistening in the torchlight snaked through the air. Men leapt from the dragon's back, slid down the cables, and landed in the courtyard. Everyone could see the silver insignia of the king's own glittering on their panoply, and the crowd muttered ominously. Swiftly the soldiers deployed, clearing a large area in the center of the courtyard and placing themselves in position around it. Shields in their left hands, spears in their right, they stood at relaxed attention, facing outward, refusing to meet anyone's eyes or answer anyone's questions. A lone dragon rider appeared. Flying over the gate, the small, swift-flying dragon hovered over the circle cleared for it, wings holding it poised in the air while it scanned the area in which it would land. By now, its rider's elegant livery, flashing red and golden in the flaring torchlight, could be easily recognized. The people caught their breath and glanced at each other with questioning eyes. The riding dragon settled to the ground, wings trembling, its flanks heaving. Flecks of saliva dripped from its fanged mouth. I forgot to edit. One moment. Let me fix this. Lunchtime, story time. There we go. Got that fixed, I hope. Give that a refresh. I'll get better at this, I promise. Okay, that's better. Okay. The riding dragon settled. Flecks of saliva dripped from its fanged mouth. Jumping from the saddle, the rider cast a swift glance around the courtyard. He was clad in the short gold-trimmed cape and red flared coat of a king's courier, and the people waited in breathless anticipation to hear the news he had to impart. Almost everyone expected it to be a declaration of war against the elves of Tribis. Some of the knights were already looking about for their squires, so that they might be ready to muster at a moment's notice. Super thirsty today. It was, therefore, with considerable shock that those standing in the courtyard saw the courier raise a hand gloved in the finest soft and supple leather and point at the block. "Is that Hugh the Hand you are about to execute?" he shouted in a voice as soft and supple as his gloves. The wizard strode across the courtyard and was admitted into the circle through the ranks of the king's own. "What if it is?" answered Magica warily. "If it is Hugh the Hand, I command you, in the name of the king, to deliver him to me, alive," said the courier. The wizard glowered at the man darkly. Keyless knights looked questioningly in Magica's direction, awaiting his orders. Until recently, the Volcarans had never known a king. In the world's very early days, Volcaran had been a penal colony established by the inhabitants of the main continent, Eulandia. The famous prison at Ureni held murderers and thieves, exiles, whores, and various other social embarrassments were shipped off to the surrounding isles of Providence, Pitrin's Exile, and the Three Journs. Life was hard on these outer isles, and over the centuries the isles produced a hard people. Each isle was ruled by various clans. Each clan's lord spent his time either beating assaults off his own lands or attacking those of his neighbors on Eulandia. Thus divided, the humans were easy prey for the stronger, wealthier elven nations of Tribis. The elves gobbled the humans up piecemeal, and for almost 40 cycles the elves ruled both Eulandia and the Volcaran Isles. Their iron grip on the humans had come to an end 20 cycles earlier. When a chieftain of the strongest clan of Volcarin married the matriarch of the strongest clan on Eulandia, rallying their people, Stephen of Pitrin's exile and Anne of Winshire formed an army that overthrew the elves and hurled them, some of them literally, off the isle. When Eulandia and Volcarin were free of occupation, Stephen and Anne proclaimed themselves king and queen, murdered their most dangerous rivals, and though it was rumored that they were now intriguing against each other, the two continued to be the most powerful and feared force in the realm. Where'd it go? I lost it. In the old days, Magica would have simply ignored the command, carried out the execution, and done away with the courier if the man proved obstinate. Now, standing in the shadow cast by the pitch-black wings of the battle dragon, the wizard was reduced to quibbling. Hugh the Hand is the murderer of our lord, Roger of Keyleth, and it is the king's own law that we take his life in punishment. His Majesty fully approves and applauds your excellent and swift execution of justice within his kingdom, said the courier with a graceful bow, and he regrets that he must interfere, but there is a royal warrant out for the arrest of the man known as Hugh the Hand. He is wanted for questioning in regard to a conspiracy against the state, a matter which takes precedence over all local affairs. Everyone knows, added the courier, looking directly into Magica's eyes, that this assassin has had dealings with the elf lords of Tribus. The wizard knew, of course, that Hugh hadn't had dealings with the elf lord of Tribus. The wizard also knew at that instant that the courier knew this as well. And if the courier knew this, then he might know a number of other things, such as how Roger of Keyleth had truly met his death. Caught in his own net, Magica flopped and floundered. "Let me see the warrant," he demanded. Nothing, it seemed, would give the king's courier greater pleasure than producing the king's warrant for Magica's viewing. Thrusting his hand into a leather pouch that hung from the dragon's saddle, the courier withdrew a scroll case. He removed the scroll inside and handed it to the wizard, who pretended to study it. The warrant would be in order. Stephen wasn't one to make a mistake like that. There was the name, Hugh the Hand, and it was sealed with the winged eye that was Stephen's device. Gnawing his lip until it was raw and bleeding, Magica could do nothing but cast his people a much-suffering glance that said he had tried, but greater powers were at work here. Placing his hand over his heart, he bowed coldly in silent, ungracious acquiescence. "His Majesty thanks you," said the courier, smiling. "You, Captain," he gestured, Gareth, his face carefully expressionless, though he, too, had followed the unspoken as well as the spoken, came up to stand behind the wizard. "Bring me the prisoner. Oh, and I'll need a fresh dragon for my return trip. King's business," he added. Those two words, king's business, could commandeer anything from a castle to a flagon of wine, a roast boar to a regiment. Those who disobeyed did so at their extreme peril. Gareth looked at Magica. The wizard literally shook with rage, but said nothing, merely gave a swift, short nod, and the knight left to obey the command. The courier deftly retrieved the parchment, re-rolled it, and slid it back into its scroll case. As he glanced about idly, awaiting Gareth's return with the prisoner, he gazed delighted on the bier. Instantly his face assumed an expression of deep sorrow. Their Majesties extended their sympathy to Lady Roger. To Lady Roger. If they can be of service, her ladyship can be assured that she has only to call upon them. Her ladyship will be most grateful," said Magica sourly. The courier smiled once again, began to slap his gloves impatiently against his thigh. Gareth was leading the prisoner past the king's own, but there was as yet no sign of a fresh mount. "About that dragon—" "Here, my lord, take this one," cried the old stable-master eagerly, offering the reins of the lord's dragon to the messenger. "Are you certain?" queried the courier, glancing from the buyer to the wizard. He was, of course, familiar with the custom of sacrificing the dragon, no matter how valuable, in honor of the fallen. Magica was with a furious snort, waved his hand. "Why not? Carry my lord's murderer away on my lord's most prized dragon. King's business, after all." "Yes, it is," said the courier. "King's business." The king's own suddenly shifted their stance, turning their spears point outward and locking shields to form a circle of steel around the courier and those who stood near him. Perhaps there are some aspects of the king's business you should be interested in discussing with his majesty. Our gracious monarch will be happy to arrange for a governing of his province in your absence, Magica. The shadow of the wings of the circling battle dragon slid over the courtyard. No, no, protested the wizard hastily. King Stephen is no more loyal subject than myself. You may assure him of that. The courier bowed and answered Magica with a charming smile. The soldiers surrounding him remained attentive and on alert. Gareth, sweating beneath his leather helm, entered the circle of steel. The captain knew how close he'd come to being ordered to fight the king's own, and his stomach was still clenching. Here's your man, Gareth said gruffly, shoving Hugh forward. The courier took in the prisoner with one swift glance that noted the lash marks on the back, the bruises and cuts on his face, the swollen lip. Hugh, his dark sunken eyes seeming to have vanished completely in the shadows beneath his brows, regarded the courier with a detached curiosity that held no hope, only a sardonic expectation of further torment. Cut loose his arms and unlock those manacles. But, my lord, he is dangerous. He cannot ride like that, and I have no time to waste. Do not worry. The courier waved a negligent hand. Unless he can sprout wings, I do not think he will try to escape by leaping from the back of a flying dragon. Gareth drew his dagger and cut the bonds around Hugh's arms. The stablemaster, summoning his helpers with a cry, gingerly entered the ring of steel, removed the saddle from the courier's spent mount, and put it on the back of Lord Roger's dragon. Patting the dragon's neck, the stablemaster cheerfully passed the reins to the courier. The old man would not see the dragon again. Whatever came into King Stephen's hands never left. But it was far better to lose it than be forced to thrust a knife into the throat of a creature who loved and trusted him than watch its life spill out, wasted on a man dead and gone. The courier mounted. Reaching down his hand, he held it out to Hugh. The assassin appeared for the first time to comprehend the fact that he was freed. His head was not on the block. That terrible sword was not about to sever his life. Moving stiffly and painfully, he stretched out his hand, caught hold of the courier's, and let the man pull him up on the dragon's back. Bring him a cloak, he'll freeze, ordered the courier. Many capes were offered, and he selected one of thick fur and tossed it to Hugh. The prisoner wrapped the cloak around his shoulders, reached back and gripped firmly the rim of the dragon's saddle. The courier spoke a word of command, and the dragon, with a trumpeting call, spread his wings and soared upward. The leader of the king's own gave an ear-piercing whistle. The battle dragon flew down until the ropes dangling from its back were within the soldier's reach. Swiftly they climbed back up and took their places on the dragon's large flat back. The dragon lifted its wings, and within moments the shadow was lifted. The sky was empty. Night's gray gloom returned. In the courtyard below, men glanced at each other in silence, their faces grim. Women, eyeing their husbands and sensing the tense atmosphere, hurriedly rounded up children, sharply reprimanding or slapping those who whined. Magica, his face livid, stalked into the keep. Gareth waited until the wizard had departed, then ordered his men to set fire to the byre. The flames crackled as the men and women gathered around and began to sing their lord's soul to his ancestors. The captain of the knights sang a song for the lord he had loved and loyally served for 30 years. When he finished, he watched the leaping, roaring flames consume the body. So, you never killed a wizard. Hugh, my friend, you might yet get your chance, if I ever see you again. King's business, Gareth grunted. If you don't show up, well, I'm an old man with nothing left to live for. His eyes went to the wizard's quarters, where a robed silhouette could be seen looking out the window. Having his duties to attend to, the captain walked to the gate to make certain all was secure for the night. Forgotten, an artist bereft of his art, Three-Chop Nick sat disconsolately on the block. Well, looks like Hugh the Hand has escaped that torment. Hopefully, he can keep on escaping. Chapter 4. Somewhere, Volcaran Isles, Midrealm. 1 minute. I gotta fix something real fast. Bear with me. I do believe I forgot to stop a download that was going on in the background. I don't think there's anybody here anyway. But still, give this a quick fix. Hope everyone's still having a good Wednesday. Okay, turn that off. And close that window. All right, that should help with the streaming problem I was having. Okay, Chapter 4, Somewhere, Volcaran Islands, Mid-Realm. The courier kept his dragon under tight rein. Given its head, the small riding dragon could swiftly outfly the larger battle dragon, but the courier did not dare fly unescorted. Elven corsairs often lurked in the clouds, waiting to snap up lone human dragon riders. Oh, that did pop up. Got some big lag going on. Okay, hopefully that has sorted itself. The courier kept his dragon flying near the tail of the night ray, the battle dragon. It was a sleek black wedge cutting through the night's gray gloom. The king's own, strapped into their harnesses, were so many black lumps upon the night ray's back. The dragons flew over the small village of Hinox, visible only because it's squat. Hey! What's going on, Winter? I'm rereading Chapter 4 because my audio was all messed up in my settings. So. Then they passed over Dandrick's shore and headed out into deep sky. The courier glanced up and down, this way and that, like a man who has not flown much before, an odd thing in a supposed king's messenger. I appreciate that. Whether you're just lurking or have me on in the background or whatever, just glad to have you. You're my first non-friend fan. Even in deep sky, it was not truly dark. As dark as legend held night has been in the ancient world before the sundering. Elven astronomers wrote that there were 3 lords of night, and though the superstitious believed that these were giant men who conveniently spread their flowing cloaks over Arianis to give the people rest, the educated knew that the lords of night were really islands of coralite floating far above them, moving in an orbit that took them, every 12 hours, between Arianis and the sun. Beneath these isles were the High Realm, purportedly where lived the Mysteriarchs, powerful human wizards who had traveled there in voluntary exile. Beneath the High Realm was the firmament, or days stars. No one knew precisely what the firmament was. Many, and not just the superstitious, believed it to be the band of diamonds and other precious jewels floating in the sky. Thus, legends of the fabulous wealth of the Mysteriarchs who had supposedly passed through the firmament evolved. There had been many attempts made by both elves and humans to fly up to the firmament and discover its secrets, but those who tried it never returned. The air was said to be so cold it would freeze blood. Several times during the night, the courier turned his head and glanced back at his companion, curious to note the reactions of a man who had been snatched from beneath the falling axe. The courier was doomed to disappointment if he thought he would see any sign of relief or elation or triumph. Grim, impassive, the assassin's face gave away nothing of the thoughts behind its mask. Here was a face that could watch a man die as coolly as another might watch a man eat and drink. The face was, at the moment, turned away from the courier. Hugh was intently studying the route of their flight, a fact that the courier noticed with some uneasiness. Perhaps sensing his thoughts, Hugh raised his head and fixed his eyes upon the courier. The courier had gained nothing from his inspection of Hugh. Hugh, however, appeared to gain a great deal from the courier. The narrowed eyes seemed to peel back skin and carve away bone, and might have, in a moment, laid bare whatever secrets were kept within the courier's brain, had not the young man shifted his eyes to the dragon's spiky mane. The courier did not look back at Hugh again. It must have been coincidence, But when the courier noted Hugh's interest in the flying route, a blanket of fog immediately began to drift over and obscure the land. They were flying high and fast, and there was not much to see beneath the shadows cast by the lords of night. But Coralite gives off a faintish blue light, causing strands of forest to show up black against the silvery radiance of the ground. Landmarks were easy to locate, castles and fortresses made of coralite that have not been covered over with a paste of crushed granite gleam softly. Towns with their shining ribbons of coralite streets show up easily from the air. During the war, when marauding elven airships were in the skies, the people covered their streets with straw and rushes. But there was no war upon the Volcaran Isles now. The majority of humans who dwelt there thought fondly that this was due to their prowess in battle, the fear they had generated among the elf lords. Oh, pardon me. Should take that top off. The courier, considering this, shook his head in disgust at their ignorance. The few humans in the realm knew the truth. Among them, King Stephen and Queen Anne. The elves of Aristogon were ignoring Volcaran and Eulandia because they had much bigger problems to deal with at the moment, a rebellion among their own people. When the rebellion was firmly and ruthlessly crushed, the elves would turn their attention to the kingdom of the humans, the barbaric beasts who had stirred up this rebellion in the first place. Stephen knew that this time the elves would not be content with conquering and occupying. This time they would rid themselves of the human pollution in their world once and forever. Stephen was quietly and swiftly setting up his pieces on the great game board, preparing for the final bitter contest. The man sitting behind the courier didn't know it, but he was to be one of those pieces. When the fog appeared, the assassin, with an inward shrug, immediately gave up attempting to ascertain where they were going. Being a ship's captain himself, he had flown most of the air lanes throughout the Isles and beyond. They had been taking a negative red-eye, traveling in the general direction of, it's this word again, Kiranandeste. Frickin' fantasy words. And then the fog had come and he could see nothing. Hugh knew the mist had not sprung up by chance, and it only confirmed that he had begun to suspect that this young courier was no ordinary royal flunky. The hand relaxed and let the fog float through his mind. Speculating about the future did no good. Not likely to be much better than the present. The future could hardly be worse. Hugh had done all he could to prepare for it. He had his bone-handled, rune-marked dagger, slipped to him at the last moment by Gareth, tucked into his belt. Hunching his bare, lacerated shoulders deep into the thick fur cape, Hugh concentrated on nothing more urgent than keeping warm. He did, however, take a certain grim delight in noting that the courier seemed to find the fog a nuisance. It slowed their flight, and he was continually having to dip down into the clear patches that would suddenly swirl up before them to see where they were. At one point, it appeared that he had managed to get them lost. The courier held the dragon steady in the air, the creature fanning its wings to keep them hovering in the sky in response to the rider's command. Hugh could feel the courier's body tense, and note the darting, shifting glances cast at various objects on the ground. It seemed, from muttered words spoken to himself, that they had flown too far in one direction. Altering course, the courier turned the dragon's head, and they were once again flying through the mist. The courier cast an irritated glance at Hugh, as much as to say that this was his fault. Early in his life, primarily for his own survival, Hugh had taught himself to be alert to all that happened around him. Now, in his 40th cycle, such precaution was instinctive, a sixth sense. He knew the instant there was a shift in the wind, a rise or dip in the temperature. Though he had no timekeeping device, he could tell within a minute or two how much time had elapsed from one given period to another. His hearing was sharp, his eyes sharper. He possessed an unerring sense of direction. There were few parts of the Volcaran Isles or the continent of Eulandia that he hadn't traveled. Adventures in his youth had taken him to distant and unpleasant parts of the larger world of Arianis. Not given to boasting, which was a waste of breath, only a man who cannot conquer his deficiencies feels the need to convince the world he has none. Hugh had always been confident in his own mind that, set him down where you would, he could, within a matter of moments, tell where upon Arianis he stood. But when the dragon, at the courier's soft-spoken command, descended from the sky and landed upon solid ground, Hugh gazed around him and was forced to admit that for the first time in his life he was lost. He had never seen this place before. The king's messenger dismounted from the dragon. Removing a glowstone from the leather pouch, he held the stone in his open palm. Once exposed to the air, the magical jewel began to give off a radiant light. A glowstone gives off heat as well, and it is necessary to place it in a container. The courier walked unhesitantly to a corner of the crumbling coralite walls surrounding their landing site. Leaning down, he deposited the glowstone in a crude iron lamp. Hugh saw no others object in the barren courtyard. Either the lamp had been left in expectation of the courier's arrival, or he himself had placed it there before he departed. The hand suspected the latter, mainly because there was no sign of anyone else nearby. Even the night tray had been left behind. It was logical to assume, therefore, that the courier had started his journey from this place and obviously expected to return. A fact that might or might not have much significance. Hugh slid down off the dragon's back. Goodness. So thirsty. I meant to drink a bunch of water before this. I didn't. I'm really bad at that. I had a lot of coffee and energy drink, but that's not great. Okay. The courier lifted the iron lamp, returning to the dragon. He stroked the proudly arched neck and murmured words of rest and comfort that caused the beast to settle itself down in the courtyard, tucking its wings beneath its body and curling its long tail round its feet. The head fell forward on the breast, the eyes closed, and the dragon breathed a contented sigh. Once asleep, a dragon is extremely difficult and even dangerous to wake, for sometimes during sleep the spells of submission and obedience which are cast over them can be accidentally broken, and you've got a confused, irate, and loudly vocal creature on your hands. An experienced dragon rider never allows his animal to sleep unless he knows there is a competent wizard nearby. Another fact Hugh noted with interest. Coming close to him, the courier raised his lantern and stared quizzically into Hugh's face, inviting question or comment. The hand saw no need to waste his breath in asking questions he knew would not be answered, and so stared back at the courier in silence. The courier, nonplussed, started to say something, changed his mind, and softly exhaled the breath he had drawn in to speak. Abruptly he turned on his heel, with a gesture to the assassin to follow, and Hugh fell into step behind his guide. The courier led the way to a place that Hugh soon came to recognize, from early and dark childhood memories, as a Kyr monastery. It was ancient and had obviously been long abandoned. The flagstones of the courtyard were cracked and in many cases missing entirely. Coralite had grown over much of the standing outer structures that had been formed of the rare granite the Kyr favored over the more common coralite. A chill wind whistled through the abandoned dwellings, while... Man, my tongue is getting tired. A chill wind whistled through the abandoned dwellings where no light shone and had probably not shone for centuries. Bare trees creaked and dry leaves crunched beneath Hugh's boots. Having been raised by the grim and dour order of Kyr monks, the hand knew the location of every monastery on the Volcaran Isles. He could not remember hearing of any that had ever been abandoned, and the mystery of where he was and why he had been brought here deepened. The courier came to a baked clay door that stood at the bottom of a tall turret. He fit an iron key into the lock. The hand peered upward, but could not see a glimmer of light in any of the windows. The door swung open silently, an indication that someone was accustomed to coming here frequently, since the rusted hinges were well oiled. Gliding inside, the courier indicated with a wave of his hand that Hugh was to follow. When both were in the cold and drafty building, the courier locked the door, tucking the key inside the bosom of his tunic. "This way," he said. The direction was not necessary. There was only one possible way for them to go, and that was up. A spiral staircase led them round and round the interior of the turret. Hugh counted 3 levels, each marked by a clay door. All were locked, the hand noted, surreptitiously testing each as they ascended. On the 4th level, at another clay door, the iron key again made an appearance. A long, narrow corridor, darker than the Lords of Night, ran straight and true before them. The courier's booted footsteps rang on the stone. Hugh, accustomed by habit to treading silently in his soft-soled, supple leather boots, made no more noise than if he had been the man's shadow. They passed 6 doors by Hugh's count, 3 on his left and 3 on his right. Before the courier raised a warning hand and they stopped at the 7th. Once again the iron key was produced. It grated in the lock and the door slid open. "Enter," the courier said, standing to one side. Hugh did as he was told. He was not surprised to hear the door shut behind him. No sound of a key turning in the lock, however. The only light in the room came from the soft glow given off by the coralight outside, but the faint shimmer illuminated the room well enough for the hand's sharp eyes. He stood still a moment, closely inspecting his surroundings. He was, he discovered, not alone. The hand felt no fear. His fingers, beneath his cloak, were clasped around the hilt of his dagger, but that was only common sense in a situation like this. Hugh was a businessman, and he recognized the setting of a business discussion when he saw it. The other person in the room with him was adept at hiding. He was silent and kept himself concealed in the shadows. Hugh didn't see the person or hear him, but he knew with every instinct that he had kept him alive through 40 harsh and bitter cycles that there was someone else present. The hand sniffed the air. "Are you an animal? Can you smell me?" queried the voice, a male voice, deep and resonant. "Is that how you knew I was in the room?" "Yeah, an animal," said Hugh shortly. "And what if I attacked you?" The figure moved over to stand by the window. He was outlined in Hugh's vision by the faint radiance of the coralight. The hand saw that his interrogator was a tall man clad in a cape whose hem he could hear dragging across the floor. The man's head and face were covered by chainmail, only the eyes visible. But the hand knew his suspicions had been correct. He knew to whom he was talking. Hugh drew forth his dagger. "A hand's breadth of steel in your heart, your majesty?" "I am wearing a mail vest," said Stephen, king of the Volcaran Isles and Eulandia cluster. He was seemingly not surprised that Hugh recognized him. A corner of the assassin's thin lips twitched. "The chainmail does not cover your armpit, Majesty. Lift your elbow." Stepping forward, Hugh placed thin, long fingers in the gap between the body armor and the covering that covering the arm. That does in the gap between the body armor and that covering the arm. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. "One thrust of my dagger. There," he shrugged. Stephen did not flinch at the touch. "I must mention that to my armorer." Hugh shook his head. "Do what you will, Majesty. If a man's determined to kill you, then you're dead. And if that's why you've brought me here, I can only offer you this advice. Decide whether you want your corpse burned or buried." "This from an expert," said Stephen, and Hugh could hear the sneer if he could not see it on the man's helmed face. "I assume your Majesty requires an expert, since you've gone through all this trouble." The king turned to face the window. He had seen almost 50 cycles, but he was well built and strong and able to withstand incredible hardships. Some whispered that he slept in his armor to keep his body hard. Certainly, considering his wife's reputed character, he might also welcome the protection. "Yes, you are an expert, the best in the kingdom, I am told." Stephen fell silent. The hand was adept at reading the words men speak with their bodies, not with their tongues. And though the king might have thought he was masking his turbulent inner emotions quite well, Hugh noted the fingers of the left hand close in upon themselves, heard the silvery clinking of the chainmail as a tremor shook the man's body. So often it was with men making up their minds to murder. "You also have a peculiar conceit, Hugh the Hand," said Stephen, abruptly breaking his long pause. "You advertise yourself as a hand of justice, of retribution. You kill those who allegedly have wronged others, those who are above the law, those whom, supposedly, my law cannot touch." There was anger in his voice and a challenge. Stephen was obviously piqued, but Hugh knew that the warring clans of Volcaran and Eulandia were currently being held together only by a mortar composed of fear and greed, and he did not figure it worth his while to argue the point with a king who undoubtedly knew it as well. "Why do you do this?" Stephen persisted. "Is it some sort of attempt at honor?" "Honor? Your Majesty talks like an elf lord." Honor won't buy you a cheap meal at a bad inn in Therpes. That can't be Therpes, can it? To herpes? Therps? Therpes it is. Ah, the money? The money. Any knife in the back killer can be had for the price of a plate of stew. That's fine for those who just want their man dead, but those who've been wronged, those who've been suffered at the hands of another, they want the one who brought them grief to suffer himself. They want him to know before he dies who brought about his destruction. They want him to experience the pain and the terror of his victims. And for this satisfaction, they're willing to pay a high price. I'm told the risks you take are quite extraordinary, that you even challenge your victim to fair combat. If a customer wants it, and is willing to pay. Hugh shrugged. The statement was too obvious for comment. The conversation was pointless, meaningless. The hand knew his own reputation, his own worth. He didn't need to hear it recited back to him. But he was used to it. It was all part of business. Like any other customer, Stephen was trying to talk his way into committing this act. It amused the hand to note that a king in this situation behaved no differently from his humblest subject. Stephen had turned and was staring out the window, his gloved hand, fist clenched, resting on the ledge. Hugh waited patiently, in silence. I don't understand. Why would those who hire you want to give a person who has wronged them the chance to fight for his life? Because in this they're doubly revenged. For then it's not my hand that strikes the killer down, your majesty, but the hands of his ancestors who no longer protect him. Do you believe this? Stephen turned to face him. Hugh could see the moonlight flash on the chainmail covering the man's head and shoulders. Hugh raised an eyebrow. His hand moved to stroke the braided, silky strands of beard that hung from his chin. The question had never before been asked of him, and proved, so he supposed, that kings were different from their subjects. At least this one was. The hand moved to the window to stand next to Stephen. The assassin's gaze was drawn to a small courtyard below them. Covered over with coralite, it glowed eerily in the darkness, and he could see, by the soft blue light, the figure of a man standing in the center. The man wore a black hood. He held in his hand a sharp-edged sword. At his feet stood a block of stone. Twisting the ends of his beard, Hugh smiled. The only things I believe in, your majesty, are my wits and my skill. So I'm to have no choice. I either accept this job, or else. Is that it? You have a choice. When I have described the job to you, you may either take it or refuse to do so. At which point my head parts company from my shoulders. The man you see is the royal executioner. He is skilled in his work. Death will be quick, clean, far better than what you were facing. That much, at least, I owe you for your time. Stephen turned to face Hugh, the eyes in the shadow of the chainmail helm dark and empty, lit by nothing within, reflecting no light from without. I must take precautions. I cannot expect you to accept this task without knowing its nature. Yet to reveal it to you is to place myself at your mercy. I dare not permit you to remain alive, knowing what you will shortly know. If I refuse, I'm disposed of by night, in the dark, no witnesses. If I accept, I'm entangled in the same web in which your majesty currently finds himself twisting. What more do you expect? You are, after all, nothing but a murderer, Stephen said coldly. And you, your majesty, are nothing more than a man who wants to hire a murderer. Bowing with an ironic flourish, Hugh turned on his heel. Where are you going? Stephen demanded. If your majesty will excuse me, I'm late for an engagement. I should have been in hell an hour previous. The hand walked toward the door. Damn you! I've offered you your life! Hugh didn't even bother to turn around. The price is too low. My life's worth nothing. I don't value it. In exchange, you want me to accept a job so dangerous you've got to trap a man to force him to take it? Better to meet death on my own terms than your majesty's. Hugh flung open the door. The king's courier stood facing him, blocking his way out. At his feet stood the glow lamp, and it cast its radiance upward, illuminating a face that was ethereal in its delicacy and beauty. He's a courier, and I'm a sartain, Hugh thought. 10,000 barrels, said the young man. Hugh's hand went to the braided beard, twisting it thoughtfully. His eyes glanced sideways at Stephen, who had come up behind him. Douse the light, commanded the king. Is this necessary, Trian? Your Majesty, Trian spoke with respect and patience, but it was the tone of one friend advising another, not the tone of a servant deferring to a master. He is the best. There is no one else to whom we can entrust this. We have gone to considerable trouble to acquire him. We can't afford to lose him. If your majesty will remember, I warned you from the beginning. Yes, I remember, Stephen snapped. He stood silently, inwardly fuming. He would undoubtedly like nothing better than to order his courier to march the assassin to the block. The king would probably, at this moment, enjoy wielding the executioner's blade himself. The courier gently drew an iron screen over the light, leaving them in darkness. Very well, the king snarled. 10,000 barrels? Hugh couldn't believe it. Yes. Wrong voice. Yes, answered Trian, when the job is done. Half now, half when the job is done? Your life now, the barrels then, Stephen hissed through clenched teeth. Hugh took a step toward the door. Half now. Stephen's words were a gasp, almost incoherent. Hugh, bowing in acquiescence, turned back to face the king. Who's the victim? Stephen drew a deep breath. Hugh heard a clicking, catching choke in the king's throat, a sound vaguely similar to the rattle in the throats of the dying. My son, said the king. Blah. Such intrigue, such suspense, conspiracies and assassinations afoot. So that was chapter 3 and 4. And given the time, that's where I'm going to stop today. I got to make sure to take notes so I can have a better recap for when I pop back in tomorrow, roughly around the same time. I might start a little later. But thank you for being here and hanging out, even if you're just lurking. We're going to do a raid, if I can figure all that stuff out again. I'll get better at this, I promise. I shouldn't make promises I can't keep. Mirror, where's the raid options? My dude. Who is alive currently? Let's see here. Boom, boom. I guess we can hit Ready Player Mama. She's good people. I like them. Start raid. Oh. She doesn't accept raids. I'm gonna have to friend her. I don't know anybody live currently. Let's see. Back. Alright. Just send y'all to Mystery Science Theater 3000. Again, thanks for showing up, people who are here. I hope you're enjoying this. It's been an experience. But have a good day. Have a good night, good afternoon, whatever time it is, wherever you are. One viewer ready to raid. 2 viewers ready to raid. All right. Love you guys. Bye.